In the small section near the rear of the ship, there were still compartments that were airtight. At least, Pendray decided, there was enough air to keep him alive for a while. If only he could get a little power into the ship, he could get the rear air purifiers to working. He left the lifeboat and closed the door behind him. There was no point in worrying about a boat he couldn't use. He made his way back toward the engine room. Maybe there was something salvageable there. Swimming through the corridors was becoming easier with practice. His cadet training was coming back to him. Then he got a shock that almost made him faint. The beam of his light had fallen full on the face of a rat. It took him several seconds to realize that the rat was dead, and several more to realize that it wasn't a rat at all. It was the spy they had been sent to pick up. He had been in the sick bay for treatments of the ulcers on his back gained from 5 years of frequent lashings as a rat slave. Pendray went closer and looked him over. He was still wearing the clothing he had had on when the Shane picked him up. Poor guy, Pendray thought. All that hell for nothing. Then he went around the corpse and continued toward the engine room. The place was still hot, but it was thermal heat, not radioactivity. A dead atomic engine doesn't leave any residual effects. 5 out of the 6 engines were utterly ruined, but the 6th seemed to be in working condition. Even the shielding was intact. Again, hope rose in Alfred Pendray's mind. If only there were tools. A half-hour's search killed that idea. There were no tools aboard capable of cutting through the hard shielding. He couldn't use it to shield the engine on the lifeboat. And the shielding that had been on the other 5 engines had melted and run. It was worthless. Then another idea hit him. Would the remaining engine work at all? Could it be fixed? It was the only hope he had left. Apparently, the only thing wrong with it was the exciter circuit leads, which had been sheared off by a bit of flying metal. The engine had simply stopped, instead of exploding. That ought to be fixable. He could try. It was something to do, anyway. It took him the better part of 2 days, according to his watch. There were plenty of smaller tools around for the job, although many of them were scattered and some had been ruined by the explosions. Replacement parts were harder to find, but he managed to pirate some of them from the ruined engines. He ate and slept as he felt the need. There was plenty of food in the sickbay kitchen, and there was no need for a bed under gravity-less conditions. After the engine was repaired, he set about getting the rest of the ship ready to move, if it would move. The hull was still solid, so the infraspace field should function. The air purifiers had to be reconnected and repaired in a couple of places. The lights, ditto. The biggest job was checking all the broken leads to make sure there weren't any short circuits anywhere. The pseudo-gravity circuits were hopeless. He'd have to do without gravity. On the 3rd day, he decided he'd better clean the place up. There were several corpses floating around, and they were beginning to be noticeable. He had to tow them, one by one, to the rear starboard airlock and seal them between the inner and outer doors. He couldn't dump them, since the outer door was partially melted and welded shut. He took the personal effects from the men. If he ever got back to Earth, their next of kin might want the stuff. On the body of the imitation rat, he found a belt pouch full of microfilm. The report on the rat's new weapon? Possibly. He'd have to look it over later. On the morning of the 4th day, he started the single remaining engine. The infraspace field came on, and the ship began moving at multiples of the speed of light. Pendray grinned. Half gone, will travel, he thought gleefully. If Pendray had had any liquor aboard, he would have gotten mildly drunk. Instead, he sat down and read the spools of microfilm. using the projector in the sickbay. He was not a scientist in the strict sense of the word. He was a navigator and a fairly good engineer, so it didn't surprise him that he couldn't understand a lot of the report. The mechanics of making a semi-nova out of a normal star were more than a little bit over his head. He'd read a little, then go out and take a look at the stars, checking their movement so that he could make an estimate of his speed. He'd jury-rigged a kind of control on the hull field, so he could aim the hulk easily enough. He'd only have to get within signaling range anyway. An Earth ship would pick him up. If there was any Earth left by the time he got there. He forced his mind away from thinking about that. It was not until he reached the last spool of microfilm that his situation was forcibly brought to focus in his mind. Thus far, he had thought only about saving himself. But the note at the end of the spool made him realize that there were others to save. The note said, "These reports must reach Earth before 22nd June 2287. After that, it will be too late." June 22nd. That was, let's see. This is the 18th of September, he thought. June of next year is 9 months away. Surely I can make it in that time. I've got to. The only question was, how fast was the hulk of the Shane moving? It took him 3 days to get the answer accurately. He knew the strength of the field around the ship, and he knew the approximate thrust of the single engine by that time. He had also measured the motions of some of the nearer stars. Thank heaven he was a navigator, and not a mechanic or something. At least he knew the direction and distance to Earth, and he knew the distance of the brighter stars from where the ship was. He had 2 checks to use then: star motion against engine thrust and field strength. He checked them, and rechecked them, and hated the answer. He would arise in the vicinity of Seoul sometime in late July, a full month too late. What could he do? Increase the output of the engine? No, it was doing the best it could now. Even shutting off the lights wouldn't help anything. They were a microscopic drain on that engine. He tried to think, tried to reason out a solution, but nothing would come. He found time to curse the fool who had decided the shielding on the lifeboat would have to be removed and repaired. That little craft, with its lighter mass and more powerful field concentration, could make the trip in 10 days. The only problem was that 10 days in that radiation hell would be impossible. He'd be a very well-preserved corpse in half that time, and there'd be no one aboard to guide her. Maybe he could get one of the other engines going. Sure, he must be able to get one more going somehow, anything to cut down that time. He went back to the engines again, looking them over carefully. He went over them again. Not a single one could be repaired at all. Then he rechecked his velocity figures, hoping against hope that he'd made a mistake somewhere, dropped a decimal point or forgotten to divide by 2. Anything. But there was nothing. His figures had been accurate the first time. For a while he just gave up. All he could think of was the terrible blaze of heat that would wipe out Earth when the rats set off the sun. Man might survive. There were colonies that the rats didn't know about, but they'd find them eventually. Without Earth, the race would be set back 500, maybe 5,000 years. The rats would have plenty of time to hunt them out and destroy them. And then he forced his mind away from that train of thought. There had to be a way to get there on time. Something in the back of his mind told him that there was a way. He had to think, really think. On June 7th, 2287, a signal officer on the Earth destroyer Muldoon picked up a faint signal coming from the general direction of the constellation of Sagittarius. It was the standard emergency signal for distress. The broadcaster only had a very short range, so the source couldn't be too far away. He made his report to the ship's captain. "We're within easy range of her, sir," he finished. "Shall we pick her up?" "Might be a rat trick," said the captain. "But we'll have to take the chance. Beam a call to Earth and let's go out there dead slow. If the detectors show anything funny, we turn tail and run. We're in no position to fight a rat ship." "You think this might be a rat trap, sir?" The captain grinned. "If you are referring to the Muldoon as a rat trap, Mr. Blake, you're both disrespectful and correct. That's why we're going to run if we see anything funny. This ship is already obsolete by our standards. You can imagine what it is by theirs." He paused. "Get that call into Earth. Tell them this ship is using a distress signal that was obsolete 6 months ago, and tell them we're going out." "Yes, sir," said the signal officer. It wasn't a trap. As the Muldoon approached the source of the signal, their detectors picked up the ship itself. It was a standard lifeboat from a battleship of the Shannon class. "You don't suppose that's from the Shane, do you?" the captain said softly as he looked at the plate. "She's the only ship of that class that's missing. But if that's a Shane lifeboat, what took her so long to get here?" "She's cut her engines, sir," said the observer. "She evidently knows we're coming." "All right. Pull her in as soon as we're close enough. Put her in number 2 lifeboat rack. It's empty." When the door of the lifeboat opened, the captain of the Muldoon was waiting outside the lifeboat rack. He didn't know exactly what he had expected to see, but it somehow seemed fitting that a lean, bearded man in a badly worn uniform and a haggard look about him should step out. The Spectre saluted. "Lieutenant Alfred Pendray of the Shane," he said, in a voice that had almost no strength. He held up a pouch. "Microfilm," he said. "Must get to Earth immediately. No delay. Hurry." "Catch him," the captain shouted. "He's falling," but one of the men nearby had already caught him. In the sick bay, Pendray came to again. The captain's questioning gradually got the story out of Pendray. "So I didn't know what to do then," he said, his voice a breath whisper. "I knew I had to get that stuff home, somehow." "Go on," said the captain, frowning. "Simple matter," said Pendray. "Nothing to it. 2 equations. Little ship goes 30 times as fast as the big ship. Big Hulk. Had to get here before 22nd June. Had to. Only way out, you understand? Anyway, 2 equations. Simple. Work 'em in your head. Big ship takes 10 months. Little one takes 10 days. But can't stay in a little ship 10 days. No shielding. Be dead before you got here, see?" "I see," said the captain patiently. "But, and here's an important point, if you stay on the big ship for 8.5 months, then you only got to be in the little ship for a day and a half to get here. Man can live that long, even under that radiation. See?" And with that he closed his eyes. "Do you mean you exposed yourself to the full leakage radiation from a lifeboat engine for 36 hours? But there was no answer. "Let him sleep," said the ship's doctor. "If he wakes up again, I'll let you know. But he might not be very lucid from here on in." "Is there anything you can do?" the captain asked. "No, not after a radiation dosage like that." He looked down at Pendray. "His problem was easy mathematically, but not psychologically. That took real guts to solve." "Yeah," said the captain gently. "All he had to do was get here alive. The problem said nothing about his staying that way." End of The Measure of a Man by Randall Garrett. This recording is in the public domain.